Anotherway, Erasmus Plus Program, Cooperation for Innovation and the Exchange of Good Practices, KA205, Strategic Partnership for Europe, funded by EU, number 2019-2-IT 03-KA205-016466. Co-funded by the Erasmus Plus Program of the European Union. Mediterranea, Associazione per lo sviluppo locale. This work is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License. To view a copy of this license, visit http://creativecommons.org or send a letter to Creative Commons, P.O. Box 1866, Mountain View, CA 94042, USA. Per altra via. Anotherway. An original method by Francesco Piccolo. Module 3. Through. Lessons 3 and 4. The shape. To give shape to an idea, to communicate it, is a human need. Human can do it in many ways, but in these lessons we literally dwell on form, on matter, because we talk about sculpture and architecture. The statuette, which we know today as Venus of Willendorf, dates back over 20,000 years ago. It is made of oolitic limestone, tinted with red ochre pigment, and it 11.1 centimeter high. There are no facial features, and feet too. It is extraordinary to think that when a written and codified language did not even exist, man still managed to leave a trace of his ideas, to reify them. That is, literally, he did thoughts, things. Res rei, in Latin, means precisely thing. I am aware that in the philosophical field, the verb reify has a different meaning, but in this context, I use it to mean this passage from the impalpable idea to the palpable form. In fact, sculpture, being three-dimensional, lends itself not only to being observed, but touched. This is because it is usually the most well-known form of figurative art for the blind. The limit of this tactile experience lies in fact that for obvious reasons, resin and or plaster models are used. So, to be precise, the contact is not direct hand sculpture, but mediated by the reproduction. However, this of the tactile experience is a subject that we will take up again in the fourth module. So why this long argument of mine on the relationship between idea and form? Because in Peralta via Another Way, you want to go backwards from form to idea and find, if necessary, an alternative way to tell the same idea. Will it be a mediated experience? Yes, certainly, but it is functional to transmit not the faithful description of the work, but the message that is contained in it. Because it is to the idea that we must arrive at, dialoguing with a work of sculpture or architecture, and investigating it not so differently from what we would do with a painting. But there are differences. Here, too, as in previous lessons, I will help me in the argumentation with an example. Again, although the work is well known, I will not indicate it in the caption, but later on. What did the author care? Can we describe it? There's an old man sitting on a stove. He has one leg forward and the other behind. He caresses his long beard with his hand, resting on boards that we can barely see. The other hand is resting on his lap. His head is facing to the left, and he has two horns sticking out of his head. The statue is imposing. It has a height of 2.35 meters. What is the shape of this figure? There are forces. Is there a motion we can detect? I can see a sinuous line that from the right leg of the man goes up and modifies its course at the height of the left hand, resting on the womb, making a large arch that follows the posture of the left arm of the man, and that, at the height of the scapula, changes again towards closing in another arc of circumference, the face of the man. We can think of the development of a conical helix. At the bottom, in the space between the two legs, two acute angles are formed, whose sides run parallel to each other. A third angle is that which has the left leg entithed on the sides. These lines, these angles, suggest a precise idea. There is an internal force that is about to come out of this man, with his eyes facing one side, and his body facing the opposite side. This twist that starts from the ankles we grasp it. This tension, underlined by the caress to the bird. We feel it. In a sculpture, in fact, the volumes amplify the range of gestures and make us participate in a physical way. A statue occupies space. It shares with us part of the space in which we are. A painting, a fresco, are delimited by a perimeter. They are flat figures. The statues are solid figures and confront us as equals. It is no coincidence that Ovid tells us in the metamorphosis of Pygmalion's mad love for the statue he sculpted, Galatea, and Michelangelo, legend has it, beat this very statue, Moses, asking him, "Why don't you speak?" Revealing the name of the artist and the title of the sculpture, if necessary, we entered the first level, that of the sculpted history. Moses, prophet and fundamental character for Christian and Jewish believers, is portrayed in the act before rising. Further the title, it confirmed that he is Moses by his characteristics, long beard and horns, and attributes, the tables of the law. There are different interpretations of the inspiring story. Moses, in fact, is a fundamental figure for the three great monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The entire book of Exodus in the Bible tells about him. Two of these interpretations are among the most fascinating. Moses, after bringing the Jewish people out of Egypt, is leading them to the promised land. Having reached Mount Sinai, he goes in prayer to seek God, and finds him. God speaks to the prophet and dictates his laws. Moses comes down from the mountain, but finds the Israelites intent on adoring a golden calf. The biblical story goes on to say that he is angry. He throws the boards and destroys them. pulverizes the idol and literally swallows it down to the people. But after some time, he will return to the mountain, asking and obtaining God's forgiveness for the people of Israel, as well as new tablets of the law. It will be on this occasion that God will pass by, and he will be able to see its shoulders, an experience that will leave his radiant face. They are not horns, therefore, but rays that for a wrong translation the author had represented in this way. The two interpretations described above differ precisely on the episode to which the sculptor refers. For Freud, yes, that of psychoanalysis, Michelangelo represents Moses before his rage, a rage that he will succeed in taming, according to the author, so as not to frustrate what he has achieved. Malcolm Macmillan and Peter Swallows, in their 2003 essay entitled Observation from the Refuse Heap, Freud, Michelangelo's Moses and Psychoanalysis, contradict Freud because the clues of the horns and the empty plates suggest that Michelangelo carved Moses during his second ascent to Sinai, the one where he sees, albeit from behind, God. According to the authors, Moses, the sculptor, is waiting for God to reveal himself. In my opinion, although more adherent to the biblical text, this hypothesis does not fully satisfy. It does not explain, for example, why Moses is getting up. He cannot follow God. He cannot even turn his eyes until he has passed. I believe that this work should be interpreted exactly as one does with a dream, where the story and the images are condensed into a melting pot of meanings. Thus, if Freud captures the character traits of impetus, anger, but also containment that Michelangelo expresses with the swollen veins, the twisting of the bust, the petrifying gaze, Macmillan and Swales contextualize the prophetic dimension of the man Moses, which is then the very reason for the creation of the sculpture. In fact, and here we enter into the history phase of the statue, Moses is sculpted precisely to be among the few who have seen God. The other person who has seen its glory is St. Paul, not by chance also in the original project of the tomb of Julius II, who commissioned the work. We are in the middle of the Renaissance, and Michelangelo Buonarroti has just arrived in Rome. He is 30 years old at the time of the commission. He will be 70 at the end of the work. In the meantime, he will paint the Sistine Chapel, and changed the posture of the statue itself, turning his head to Moses, as demonstrated by recent restoration studies in 2003 led by Antonio Forcellino. A troubled history then, although the statue's location has always been this one, despite the original project wanted it in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, and not in St. Peter in Chains in the Monte district. But not all the works of a sculptor are reproductions of human bodies. And what is done in that case? You look for the message here too. Take this contemporary work, for example. It is called Untitled Portrait of Rose in L.A. and is by Felix González Torres, an American artist of Cuban origin. Where's the shape? What are we looking at? A bunch of colored candy in a corner in a room. They're actually there for us. Those who visit the museum can take one like 10 of them and eat them. But if everyone did, what would be left of the work? We can't ignore the artist's story this time. The history in the work, the history of the work, the inspiring history are intimately connected to the artist's personal history. Rose is Felix's boyfriend, who died of AIDS in 1991. 175 pounds is Rose's weight. By consuming the candy, we consume Rose, and we become the virus that consumed him. But Felix gives us an experience of his love for Rose, of his story with him. A story as sweet as only candy can be. The body, like candy, can disappear, but what we felt remains. Whether it's the taste of a candy or a kiss, this experience changes us. Perhaps I had. There is also a warning. Love people, don't eat them like candy. Why is this work important? Because in order to fully realize itself, it asks for our contribution. We must take the candy, taste it, eat it. From a symbolic point of view, Felix González Torres feeds us with his art. It becomes part of us. Its history becomes ours. From an experiential point of view, how many works of art can involve us as much as his? The sight of multicolored cellophane, the sound as you discard the candy and eat it, the smell and taste of it. We, who must bend down to take a piece of the work, the candy, thus contributing to its full realization. Contemporary art, especially sculpture, has expanded the common space between the work and the user of the work. It has shortened the distances. Monumentality is replaced often by proximity. This aspect is even more evident in architecture. We see the two distinct disciplines today, but in the past it was not so unusual for a sculptor to also be an architect or painter. Michelangelo, for example, painted the Sistine, sculpted the Moses, designed the Dome of St. Peter's. Phidias designed the Parthenon, but created the Chrysoelephantine statue of the goddess Athena. The palaces, temples, all the buildings and installations that we call monuments have something to tell. They are the ones who, more than anyone else, know the history of the place that hosts them. They are the city that hosts them. The word monument comes from the Latin monere, a verb that means to remember. Monuments are therefore the material memory, stone, marble, wood, metal, of our culture. They are witnesses of what has happened and is happening. They are the legacy that we have received and that we will leave to the generations after us. They are part of history, but above all, they are part of that collective memory, so important for us at Per Altra Via Anotherway. Unlike painting or sculpture, where the role of the client is marginal, or at most relegated to some corner of the work, like the appearance of a film, in architecture the client is fundamental. In front of a monument, we have to ask ourselves, who wanted it? In reference to what? And why here? And also, who designed it? At what time? By joining which school? Let's fly to France and analyze a monument symbol of Paris, the Eiffel Tower. From a descriptive point of view, it is a tower over 300 meters high with four pillars at the base that converge at the top. These are arched and interrupted by three platforms that act as a belvedere. It has slender lines. The iron gratings and curves give lightness to unimposing work. The client was the French government on the occasion of the Great Universal Exhibition of 1899. The project presented by the engineer Gustav Eiffel, one out of 100 submitted as a great work to be placed at the entrance to the exhibition on the centenary of the French Revolution. Eiffel also availed himself of the advice of the first creators, Carclin and Nuguier, and of the architect Sauvestre, who took particular care of the aesthetic aspect of the tower. At that time, it was considered a visionary project because it involved building the tallest building in the world without bricks, among other things. The remarkable visual impact and the location in the Champ de Mars near the Seine provoked ferocious criticism, a real intellectual and judicial war between for and against. The government itself reduced its financial contribution, and Eiffel, as an entrepreneur in charge, found himself a commissioner. A complicated path, then. Today, the tower stands over Paris, and surely its message is still legible. The French superiority in producing progress. Over time, the monument has been enriched with new meanings. It is considered the emblem of an entire historical period, that of Belle Époque, a period in which it was believed that progress would never stop, and that human, thanks to technology and science, would achieve happiness. Therefore, this overwhelming power still soars in the skies of Paris. It doesn't matter if, after less than 20 years, these beliefs will shipwreck together with Titanic and dye themselves with blood in the First World War. We can ascend and delude ourselves into dominating the world just as our ancestors did. Every architectural project, therefore, wants to tell a story, to express a concept. If a king wants to compete with his cousins, to affirm that his court is richer than the others, he calls the architect Vanvitelli and has a palace designed that goes beyond Versailles, and we are left with the magnificent palace of Caserta. If a pope during the Renaissance wanted to affirm the centrality of Rome over the rest of the other dioceses, he had a church designed so large and imposing that it would affirm this supremacy. If his intentions meet the genius of Michelangelo and Bramante, the result is St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The architecture of the regime, then, do much more. They structure the spaces to spread, publicize, affirm, I would say inculcate, the ideas of the regime. I'll give two examples specifying that here we don't intend to pronounce on the historical events of any people or nation. We are talking about architecture as a language, and since propaganda is the soul of a regime, it has obviously made use of this language. From my point of view, every legacy that comes to us from the past is precious. Indeed, the heavier the legacies, the more the monument fulfills its function and says, "Remember." The first is Palazzo della Civiltà Italiana by the architects Guerrini, La Padula, Romano. Started in 1939 and finished in 1953. In 1939, in Italy, there is the totalitarian fascist regime. The second is the Buțluja Memorial House in Bulgaria by architect George Stoil. Built between 1974 and 1981 and inaugurated by Todor Zivkov, General Secretary of the Bulgarian Communist Party. In both cases, the building is placed very high up, using an artificial or natural difference in height. This underlines the centrality of power. They do not have great decorations externally, because the people are asked to be rigorous and disciplined, and the monuments have clean and rigorous lines. At the end of the 20th century, a new idea of monumental architecture began to make its way. The monument is no longer something that attracts the passerby, the citizen, the tourist. It doesn't impose itself as an exclamation point, but creeps in like a question mark, forcing the person to reflect. In this sense, it is possible to interpret the oxymoron invisible monument of Gers in Saarbrücken. Watchman describes it as burning memory underfoot. Those who walk on it ignore that the cobblestones engraved the name of a Jewish cemetery, destroyed by the Nazis on the underground side, and therefore that name is invisible. But the passerby is in front of what used to be the Gestapo headquarters, and the square is named after the invisible monument. A question will have to be asked sooner or later. Another example of this new way of conceiving the monument is the Denkmal für die ermordeten Juden Europas by Eisenman and Serra. You come across it walking through the center of Berlin. You get lost in a forest of concrete pillars so close together that one person can pass by at a time. The floor is undulating. Sounds become rarefied and has no entrance or exit. You can wander through it until you decide to get out. It's like when you run away from reality and don't accept what's in front of you, and suddenly you fall into the nightmare of dictatorship. Here too the person does not enjoy the work, but experiences the work, and from the relationship with it springs the very meaning of the work. Codes change, languages change, because it is humanity that evolves. In this lesson, the images are used for educational purposes only, and for the most part are original. Those for which it has been possible to identify the source are mentioned in the image itself. For the others, the author remains available to give credit to any rights holders who request it, using the following address: peraltravia@gmail.com.